In the shadow of the jagged peaks, where the wind whispered secrets of forgotten oaths, a single loaf of bread sealed Thalia Wren's fate. The air in Eldridge Hollow bit like fangs, sharp and unrelenting, carrying the scent of pine resin and distant hearth fires that mocked her gnawing emptiness. Thalia's bare feet sank into the snow-dusted path leading to the village square, each step a silent rebellion against the weakness that clawed at her bones. She was an omega, marked by the cruel lottery of birth, small-framed, with eyes like storm clouds, and hair the color of raven wings, forever on the fringes of the pack's warmth. For weeks, the famine had tightened its grip on the mountainside settlement, turning neighbors into ghosts and trust into suspicion. Thalia had scavenged what she could from the frozen underbrush, but survival demanded more than roots and regret. The loaf had been a fleeting warmth in her hands, pilfered from the baker's stall under the cover of twilight. Not for greed, but for the child in her sister's care, whose whimpers echoed in Thalia's dreams like the howls of lost wolves. She hadn't meant to be seen, but eyes in the shadows always found the desperate. Now, the square teemed with the pack, fur-clad figures huddled against the encroaching night, their breaths mingling in white plumes under the rising moon. Torches sputtered in iron brackets, casting flickering gold across faces etched with hardship and judgment. The elder, a grizzled beta named Korvath, stood atop the weathered platform, his voice booming like thunder over the murmurs. "Thalia Wren, Omega of no lineage, you stand accused of theft from the communal stores. In times of scarcity, such betrayal invites the wild back into our midst. The law is clear. The pit claims those who would starve us all." Her heart pounded, a frantic drum against her ribs as rough hands seized her arms. She twisted, tasting blood where her lips split against a guard's gauntlet, but resistance only drew growls from the crowd. "It was for Ilara," she rasped, her voice swallowed by the wind. "The little one. She fades without it." No one met her gaze. In their eyes, she saw the reflection of their own fears, another mouth to feed, another weakness in the chain. They dragged her toward the edge of the square, where the ground fell away into the infamous wolf pit. Carved into the mountainside generations ago, it was a yawning maw of jagged rock and eternal shadow, ringed by stakes driven deep into the permafrost. Legends whispered of the beasts below, feral wolves, exiled from the packs for their savagery, their eyes glowing with the moon's madness. No one survived the pit. It was the pack's unyielding justice, a reminder that survival demanded ruthlessness. Thalia's fingers brushed the hidden chain at her throat, the lunar pendant, a fragile crescent of silver, etched with runes her mother had pressed into her palm before the fever claimed her. It was no heirloom of worth, just a talisman against the dark, warm now against her chilled skin as if alive with some buried pulse. She clutched it, drawing a shallow breath of icy air that burned her lungs. The guards halted at the brink, the crowd's chants rising like a dirge. "For the pack! For the pack!" One shoved her forward, and she tumbled, the world tilting into vertigo. Rocks scraped her palms as she clawed for purchase. The drop endless until her body struck the frozen earth below with a jolt that expelled the air from her chest. Pain bloomed in her side, hot and insistent, mingling with the metallic tang of blood on her tongue. She lay there, gasping, the pit's walls looming like the jaws of some ancient beast. Darkness pressed in, broken only by slivers of torchlight from above. The air down here was thicker, laced with musk and earth, the faint echo of dripping water from unseen crevices. Thalia pushed herself up, knees sinking into the snow-patched ground, her body trembling not just from cold, but from the certainty of what came next. The wolves. She could hear them already, low rumbles stirring in the gloom, shadows shifting at the edges of her vision. They emerged one by one, silver-furred phantoms with eyes like embers in the half-light. 7 of them, circling with predatory grace, their paws silent on the frost. Thalia's breath hitched, her back pressing against the rough wall as the largest, a massive alpha with a scar twisting across its muzzle, lowered its head and sniffed the air. Hunger gleamed in its gaze, mirroring her own, but something held it back. The pack tightened their circle, breaths steaming, muscles coiling for the leap. "Please," she whispered, more to the moon than to them, her fingers tightening around the pendant. Its edges bit into her palm, a sting that grounded her amid the terror. The alpha wolf paused, nostrils flaring, then tilted its head as if listening to a voice only it could hear. One by one, the others followed, their growls fading into puzzled whines. They did not lunge. Instead, they circled closer, not in threat, but in reverence. The alpha dipped its head low, ears flattening, and the others mirrored it, bowing as if before a queen. Above, the crowd's chants faltered into stunned silence. Thalia's pulse thundered in her ears, the pendant pulsing warmer now, almost feverish against her skin. What sorcery was this? She was no heir, no blessed one, just a thief, broken and alone. A shadow fell across the pit's rim, broader than any guards, commanding the night itself. The Alpha King, Thorn Blackwood, stepped into the torchlight, his presence a storm contained. Tall and unyielding, with hair like midnight and eyes scarred by battles unseen. He carried the weight of the realm on shoulders clad in fur-trimmed leather. Whispers rippled through the throng. The king, rarely seen beyond his icebound citadel, drawn by the unrest. His gaze pierced the depths, locking onto Thalia amid the kneeling wolves. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. The wind stilled, the moon hung heavy and silver. In that moment, something ancient stirred, a thread of destiny pulling taut, and Thorn's face paled as recognition dawned. The beasts knew her, and now so did he. Thorn's boots crunched against the frozen rim of the pit, the sound echoing like a judgment in the stunned hush. The wolves below did not stir from their bowed vigil, their silver coats gleaming under the moon's unyielding gaze, as if the beasts themselves had become statues in her honor. Thalia's chest heaved, each breath a ragged plea against the cold that seeped into her bones, her fingers still clenched around the lunar pendant. It burned now, not with warmth, but with an insistent throb, like a second heartbeat sinking to the rhythm of the night. He descended the rope ladder with the fluid grace of a predator who knew no fear, yet his eyes, storm-gray and shadowed by old sorrows, betrayed a flicker of something deeper, a fracture in the king's unassailable armor. The crowd above murmured, a tide of awe and dread, but Thorn ignored them, his focus narrowing to the woman amid the kneeling pack. She was no vision of royalty, disheveled, bloodied, her simple woolen shift torn and muddied by the fall. Yet the wolf's deference wrapped her in an aura he could not deny, stirring the curse that gnawed at his own soul. Thalia shrank back as his shadow engulfed her, the alpha wolf at her side, lifting its head only to whine softly, pressing its flank against her leg as if to shield her. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as the rocks that had bruised her, but beneath it lurked a treacherous curiosity. This was Thorn Blackwood, the Alpha King, whose name evoked both salvation and ruin, the ruler who had forged peace from the blood-soaked wars of the clans, only to bear the scars of betrayals that whispered through every hall of his citadel. Legends spoke of his melancholy, how he wandered the frozen wilds alone, haunted by a queen lost to treachery years ago. What wound drew him here, to this forsaken hollow? "You command them," he said, his voice low and resonant, carrying the weight of thunder wrapped in velvet. It was not a question, but an accusation laced with wonder. He knelt at a careful distance, his gloved hand extended not in threat, but in the manner of one approaching a sacred flame. The pendant at her throat caught the moonlight, its crescent rune pulsing faintly, and Thorn's breath caught. He knew that symbol, the mark of the lunar air foretold in the ancient scrolls of the Deuce's temple, a bloodline thought extinguished in the purges of old. Thalia's lips parted, but no words came. Instinct screamed at her to flee, to deny this madness, yet her body betrayed her, a shiver of recognition rippling through her veins like the first melt of spring snow. His scent enveloped her, pine smoke and iron resolve mingled with the faint metallic tang of old blood. It stirred something primal, a pull she had always suppressed in the pack's indifferent shadows. But she was no heir. She was the thief, the outcast, her life a litany of quiet desperations. They sense my fear, she managed finally, her voice a fragile thread in the chill air. Nothing more. You've come to finish what the pit began, haven't you? For the pack's justice. Thorn's gaze darkened, guilt flickering like a torch in wind. He had arrived not as executioner, but as witness to an unraveling fate. The curse upon him, a shadow woven by a rival alpha's sorcery during the last great betrayal, had driven him from his throne, his body racked by visions of fire and fangs that mirrored the losses he could not atone for. Fleeing the Citadel's suffocating duties, he had roamed these mountains, seeking solace in solitude, only to be drawn inexorably to Eldridge Hollow by rumors of unrest. Now, here she was, an Omega who tamed the untamable, her presence a balm and a blade to his fractured spirit. "I come for truth," he replied, his tone edged with the weariness of one who had bartered mercy for power too many times. "The wolves do not bow to fear. They sense blood, ancient, unbound." He reached toward the pendant, halting when she flinched, her eyes wide with the terror of the unknown. In that moment, their gazes locked, and the world narrowed to the space between them. The steam of their breaths mingling, the distant weevo of wind through the peaks, the subtle shift of fur as the pack watched, guardians rather than hunters. Curiosity warred with denial in Thalia's heart. She wanted to hate him, this king who embodied the hierarchies that had crushed her kind, Omegas like her, relegated to scraps and silence. Yet his eyes held no pity, only a raw vulnerability that mirrored her own hidden fractures. The pendant warmed further, its rune glowing faintly against her skin, as if urging her to bridge the chasm. She edged forward, just a fraction, her hand brushing the alpha wolf's ear. The beast nuzzled her palm, its warmth a stark contrast to the encroaching frost. Above, the crowd's whispers swelled into demands, justice, explanation, the king's decree. Thorn rose slowly, his silhouette cutting against the starry void, but he did not call for the guards. Instead, he extended his hand once more, palm up, an offer laced with risk. "Come with me, Thalia Wren. The pit is no place for revelations. There are enemies in these shadows greater than beasts or bread." She hesitated, the pull instinctive, yet resisted, born of a lifetime's caution. To accept was to step into a destiny she did not claim, to entwine her fragile thread with his burdened crown. The wolves rose as one, flanking her, their eyes reflecting the moon's silver promise. Fear whispered retreat, but curiosity, the spark of something unspoken, drew her forward. Her fingers met his, cold leather against chilled skin, and in that touch, a spark ignited, visceral and undeniable, like blood meeting flame. As they ascended the ladder, the pack below lifting their muzzles to the sky in a chorus of howls that shook the night, Thalia felt the weight of eyes upon her, not just the crowd's, but the moon's eternal watch. The pendant settled against her chest, quiet now, but forever changed. What curse or gift had she awakened in him, and what price would it demand of her soul? And now I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The wind clawed at Thalia's skin as they crested the pit's rim, the rope ladder's rough fibers still biting into her palms like accusations from the earth itself. Thorn's grip on her hand was firm yet unyielding, a tether in the chaos that erupted around them, the crowd's murmurs swelling into a roar of confusion and outrage. Torches hissed in the gusts, their flames twisting like serpents, casting erratic shadows that danced across the faces of the pack. Eldridge Hollow's elders pushed forward, Corvath at their forefront, his weathered features twisted in disbelief, while the guards fingered their blades, eyes darting between their king and the Omega who had tamed the untamable. Thalia's legs trembled beneath her, the adrenaline of the pit ebbing into a bone-deep ache. But she did not release Thorn's hand. The lunar pendant at her throat hummed faintly, a subtle vibration that synced with the distant howls echoing from the depths below, as if the wolves mourned her departure or warned of shadows yet to come. She felt exposed under the moon's pale scrutiny, her torn shift offering no shield against the cold or the stares that branded her a witch, a pretender, a threat to the fragile order of their starving world. "Highness," Corvath barked, his voice cutting through the fray like a whetted knife, "this thief commands no beasts. The pit's judgment stands. Her sorcery mocks the Deusa's law." The crowd surged, a wave of fur and fury, their chants fracturing into demands for blood. Thalia's breath caught, the metallic scent of fear sweat mingling with the pine-laced air, her free hand instinctively rising to the pendant as if it could ward off the tide. Thorn stepped before her, his broad frame a bulwark against the press, his free hand raised in a gesture that silenced the nearest souls. His eyes, those storm-gray depths, swept the assembly with the quiet authority of one who had stared down armies. "The wolves have spoken," he said, his tone resonant and unhurried, carrying the weight of ancient oaths. "And the moon bears witness. This woman is no thief to be discarded. She is the thread the fates have woven into our unraveling tapestry." Guilt shadowed his words, a personal echo of the betrayals that had hollowed him, the queen's death, a ghost that lingered in every decree he uttered. He had come to these hollows seeking exile from his own throne, haunted by visions that clawed at his nights, only to find a mirror of his fractures in her defiant gaze. But the crowd was not swayed by King's riddles. A burly beta, face scarred from old skirmishes, lunged forward with a snarl, blade glinting in the torchlight. "Lies! She's poisoned the beasts! Send her back!" Chaos ignited, shouts turned to shoves, and the guards faltered, loyalty splintering under the strain of famine and fear. Thalia's heart hammered, the pendant's warmth spreading like liquid fire through her veins, urging her to flee, to deny the pull that bound her to this stranger king. Yet, in his shadow, she felt a flicker of something forbidden, safety perhaps, or the illusion of it. Thorn moved like the wind itself, his other hand snapping out to seize the attacker's wrist, twisting with controlled ferocity until the blade clattered to the snow. "Stand down!" he growled, the command laced with alpha compulsion that rippled through the air, bending wills like reeds in a gale. The beta crumpled to his knees, whimpering, but others pressed in, emboldened by whispers of rival alphas stirring in the border clans, whispers Thorn knew too well, for his curse had weakened the realm's defenses, inviting old enemies to circle like the wolves below. "We cannot stay," Thorn murmured to Thalia, his voice low against her ear, breath warm amid the chill. "The hollow turns against us both." He pulled her toward the tree line, the wolves' howls rising in answer from the pit, a spectral chorus that masked their retreat. She followed, resistance warring within her. Why trust this crowned wanderer, whose touch ignited instincts she had long buried? The Omega in her recoiled from the hierarchies he embodied, the power that had condemned her kind to silence. Yet fear of the mob and the inexplicable thrum of the pendant propelled her steps through the deepening snow. They plunged into the forest's embrace, branches laden with frost whipping at their faces, the moon filtering through the canopy in silver shards that painted their path. Thorn's strides were sure, navigating the hidden trails as if the mountains whispered their secrets to him alone. But Thalia sensed the strain in his posture, the subtle limp from an old wound, the way his free hand hovered near his dagger's hilt. Behind them, pursuit crashed through the underbrush, shouts and snapping twigs, the common enemy forging an uneasy alliance between the outcasts. A narrow ravine opened before them, its walls sheer and glistening with ice, a natural bastion against the night. Thorn guided her down a concealed ledge, their boots slipping on the frozen stream that snaked below. "Here," he said, pressing into a cleft cave half-veiled by overhanging pines, its mouth a dark maw exhaling cold breath. Inside, the air was still, laced with the mineral tang of stone and the faint, comforting musk of earth. He released her hand to gather fallen branches, his movements efficient yet shadowed by melancholy, as if every act of survival recalled losses unhealed. Thalia sank against the wall, her body shivering not just from exposure, but from the storm within. The pendant cooled against her skin, its glow fading, leaving her to confront the man who had upended her world. He kindled a small fire with flint and tinder from his pouch, flames leaping to life with a soft crackle, their warmth pushing back the dark. Orange light played across his features, etching the lines of guilt deeper, the furrow of his brow, the scar along his jaw from a betrayal he could not forgive himself for. "Why save me?" she asked, her voice barely above the fire's whisper, curiosity edging out fear. "A king risks nothing for an Omega's whim." Thorn met her gaze across the flames, the fire's reflection mirroring the embers in his eyes. "Because the wolves saw what I have long denied, a light in the shadow of my curse." He spoke of it haltingly, the sorcery that plagued him, visions of blood and fire, a rival's hex that sapped his strength, forcing him to roam lest he doom his realm. In her, he confessed, he glimpsed redemption, not as a prize, but as a trial, the Deuce's hand weaving their paths amid the guilt that chained him. Empathy stirred in Thalia's chest, unbidden and raw, like the first thaw cracking winter's hold. She had known rejection's bite, the pack's indifference a slow poison. Yet here was a king laid bare, his power no shield against sorrow. The fire's heat seeped into her limbs, mirroring the tentative bond forming, fragile, resisted, born of shared vulnerability. Outside, the pursuers' cries faded into the wind's mournful howl, the common foe binding them closer in the refuge's hush. As the flames steadied, Thalia extended her hand not in fear, but in quiet offering, the pendant catching the light like a promise. Thorn took it, his touch lingering, and in that silence the cave became sanctuary, the moon above bearing witness to wounds beginning to mend. But the night held deeper threats, and dawn would demand choices neither was ready to face. The fire's embers pulsed like a dying heart in the cave's shadowed throat, casting elongated silhouettes that writhed against the damp stone walls. Thalia huddled closer to the flames, her knees drawn to her chest, the woolen shift clinging to her skin like a second layer of frost. The warmth seeped into her reluctantly, chasing away the night's bite, but doing little to thaw the knot of unease twisting in her gut. Thorn sat across from her, his broad form, a sentinel in the half-light, methodically sharpening his dagger with a whetstone that sang a low, rhythmic dirge. The sound mingled with the wind's distant moan outside, a lullaby laced with warning, while the lunar pendant at her throat lay heavy, its silver crescent cool now, as if biding its time. She watched him through the veil of her lashes, curiosity a persistent ache amid the wariness. His confessions had hung in the air between them like smoke, tales of a curse born in the blood-soaked halls of his citadel, a rival alpha's venomous rite that conjured visions of carnage, sapping his command over the packs and eroding the realm's fragile peace. He spoke of guilt as an old companion, the queen's betrayal, a wound that festered, turning mercy into a luxury he could no longer afford. Yet in his voice, raw and resonant, Thalia heard echoes of her own silences. the pack's rejection, the endless hunger that had driven her to the baker's stall, the sister's child whose fading eyes haunted her like ghosts in the snow. "Why me?" she murmured, her voice threading through the crackle of flames, fragile as new ice. "You speak of fates and heirs, but I'm no riddle to be solved, just an omega, scraping shadows for scraps." Her fingers traced the pendant's edge, the runes beneath her touch stirring faintly, like veins awakening under skin. She had always dismissed it as her mother's folly, a trinket against the dark, not a key to any throne. But since the pit, it had changed, warmer in moments of peril, cooler in quiet, as if it breathed with her. Thorn's hand stilled on the whetstone, his gray eyes lifting to meet hers, shadowed by the fire's glow. In their depths, she saw the melancholy that defined him, the ethical king burdened by duty, his power a crown of thorns. "The Deusa does not choose the worthy," he replied, his tone measured, laced with the philosophy of one who had bartered his soul for survival. "She chooses the broken, to forge them into something greater. What is strength, if not choosing mercy when the world demands blood?" He set the dagger aside, leaning forward, the fire painting his scarred jaw in flickering gold. His scent enveloped her again, smoke and resolve, undercut by the faint copper of old wounds, stirring that instinctive pull. She resisted, rationalizing it as the cave's confinement, nothing more. Outside, the wind rose to a howl, carrying the distant uivo of wolves that seemed to circle the ravine, guardians or harbingers, their cries weaving through the night like threads of silver fate. Thalia's pulse quickened, the pendant warming abruptly, its heat spreading through her chest like spilled wine on snow. She gasped, clutching it, visions flickering at the edges of her sight. Moonlit forests drenched in crimson, packs clashing under a blood-red eclipse, Thorn's form racked by shadows that clawed at his flesh. Not memories, hers or his, but something deeper, a revelation uncoiling from the pendant's core. The cave trembled subtly, dust sifting from the ceiling as if the mountain itself stirred. Thorn surged to his feet, dagger in hand, his body tensing like a bowstring. "What sorcery?" But his words died as Thalia rose unsteadily, the pendant now aglow, its light piercing the gloom like a blade of moonlight. Her eyes, storm-cloud gray, shimmered with an otherworldly sheen, and the air thickened with the scent of frost-kissed pine and ancient blood. Instinct guided her, unbidden. She extended her hand toward the cave's mouth, whispering words she did not know, syllables of the old tongue her mother had hummed in fevered delirium. The wolves answered. From the ravine they poured in, a silver tide of fur and fang, eyes like embers under the moon's proxy. Not 5 or 7, but dozens, slipping through the night with silent reverence, their paws leaving no mark on the snow. They flanked the entrance, forming a living barrier, heads lowered in submission, not to Thorn, but to her. The alpha from the pit led them, its scarred muzzle brushing her ankle, a whine escaping its throat that resonated in her bones. Thalia's breath came in shallow bursts, terror and awe warring within her, the gift manifesting as a flood, overwhelming, raw. She felt their essences, loyalty forged in starlit oaths, hunger tempered by destiny, a chorus of souls bending to the lunar air's unspoken command. Thorn staggered back, his face paling under the pendant's ethereal light, realization crashing over him like an avalanche. He had sought the air in temples and tomes, a savior to shatter his curse, the visions that foretold the realm's fall under a rival's moonless reign. But here she stood, the outcast Omega, her rejection a forge for this power, her blood, the key to unbinding the hex woven into his veins. "You are she," he breathed, voice thick with wonder and dread, dropping to one knee not in fealty, but in the reverence of one glimpsing redemption's edge. The Pathfinder, born to heal what power cannot, the wolves, the moon, They claim you as their own, and through you, perhaps, my chains break. Thalia recoiled, the visions receding as the pendant's glow dimmed, leaving her trembling. The wolf's warmth a stark contrast to the cold knot of denial in her chest. This gift was no blessing. It was a burden, demanding she step from shadows into a destiny that could shatter them both. The bond tugged at her, resisted yet insistent, born of shared wounds under the lunar gaze. Outside, the pursuers' torches flickered in the distance, their shouts a reminder that revelation invited war. What moral crossroads awaited? Embrace the crown of fangs, or flee the fate that saw her worth amid the blood and snow? Empathy flickered in her toward him, the king's guilt mirroring her shame, their paths entwined by the Deuce's cruel mercy. But acceptance was a choice, not a surrender. And as the wolves settled at her feet, their breaths steaming in unison, Thalia wondered if healing one wound would only carve another deeper. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The moon hung low over the ravine like a severed blade, its silver edge slicing through the canopy to illuminate the wolves' vigilant forms encircling the cave's mouth. Thalia's breath came in shallow rhythms, syncing with the pack's collective rise and fall, their warmth a living blanket against the encroaching frost. The pendant at her throat throbbed faintly, a remnant pulse from the revelation that had reshaped the night, binding her to these beasts in ways she could neither command nor comprehend. She withdrew her hand from the alpha wolf's flank, its fur coarse and alive under her fingers, and met Thorn's gaze across the flickering fire. His kneeling form stirred something raw in her, a mix of pity and defiance, for in his awe she saw the mirror of her own unraveling. "We must move before dawn," he said, rising with the deliberate grace of one who had long learned to mask his fractures. His voice carried the weight of unspoken wars, the curse's visions still clouding his eyes like storm remnants. "The Hollow's elders will not yield to omens. They've sent ravens to the border clans. My brother's shadow stirs in the north, the rival who wove this hex upon me." He spoke of Draven Blackwood, the traitor kin whose ambition had poisoned the bloodline, slaying the queen in a bid for the throne, and cursing Thorn with phantoms that weakened his rule. Forgiveness had eluded him, a moral thorn driving him into exile, yet now, with her gift unveiled, the choice loomed, war to reclaim his realm, or mercy that might doom it. Thalia nodded, though doubt coiled in her chest like frostbite's bite. Freedom whispered temptations. Slip away into the wilds, leave this king and his burdens to the wind's mercy. Reclaim the shadows where omegas like her survived unseen. But the wolves rose as one, their eyes reflecting the moon's indifferent light, urging her forward. The pendant warmed against her skin, a subtle insistence that tugged at the bond she resisted, rationalizing it as survival's illusion, not destiny's chain. Love, if it dared bloom here, was no soft reward but a trial forged in blood and choice. They ventured out under the wolves' escort, the pack fanning into the tree line like silver specters, their paws silent on the snow. The forest breathed with nocturnal life, branches creaking under ice's weight, the distant snap of twigs betraying pursuit. Thorn led, his limp more pronounced now, the curse sapping his vigor as visions flickered at his edges, flashes of firelit betrayal, Draven's sneer amid the citadel's ruins. Thalia walked beside him, her bare feet numbed by the powder, each step a negotiation between the cold's embrace and the fire of revelation burning within. The air tasted of pine and iron, the moon's glow painting their path in ethereal strokes, turning breath to mist and shadows to omens. The confrontation came at the ravine's frozen throat, where the stream widened into a silver-veined basin ringed by jagged boulders. Torches bloomed in the distance, a ragged line advancing through the gloom. Eldridge Hollow's guards, bolstered by Border Clan scouts, their banners fluttering like wounds in the night. At their head rode Corvath, mounted on a shaggy steed, his grizzled face illuminated by sputtering flames. Flanking him was a figure Thalia recognized from whispers, A lean beta with eyes like chipped obsidian, once her pack's enforcer, now a turncoat whispering to rival ears. And behind them, the true shadow, Draven Blackwood himself, astride a black warhorse, his armor etched with runes of forgotten sorcery, the air around him thick with the scent of blood and ambition. The wolves bristled, a low growl rippling through their ranks, but Thalia raised a hand, the pendant flaring in response. Instinct guided her, the gift manifesting as a command woven into the wind. Hold. The pack obeyed, forming a crescent barrier, their forms a wall of fur and fang under the lunar gaze. Thorn halted, drawing his sword with a rasp that echoed like judgment, his body tensing against the curse's fresh assault, a vision of Draven's blade piercing the queen's heart, guilt flooding his veins like venom. "Brother," Draven called, his voice a silken blade cutting the chill, dismounting with predatory ease. His eyes, a colder gray than Thorn's, fixed on Thalia, recognition dawning as the wolf's deference betrayed her. So the heir emerges from the muck, a thief Omega to claim what blood has denied me? The Dusa mocks us both. He laughed, low and bitter, circling the basin with his men, blades glinting. Corvath spat into the snow, his betrayal laid bare. "She bewitched the pit, sire. The hollow starves while she plays at queenship." The enforcer. Beta sneered, his scar twisting, Thalia's past crashing upon her, the pack's rejection now a weapon in rival hands. Thorn stepped forward, sword steady despite the tremor in his limbs, his ethical core clashing with the warlord's call. "The curse ends tonight, Draven, not with your throne of bones, but with Mercy's blade. She is the pathfinder. Yield and find redemption in surrender." But Draven's smile was a scar's twist, his hand gesturing to the scouts, who loosed arrows whistling through the air. The wolves surged, chaos erupting, snarls and clashes of steel, blood spraying dark against the snow like spilled ink under moonlight. Thalia dodged a lunging guard, her body moving with borrowed grace from the pack's bond, the pendant channeling their fury into her veins. In the fray, Draven closed on Thorn, their blades meeting in a shower of sparks, the brothers' duel a whirlwind of old wounds. "Mercy weakened you," Draven hissed, pressing the attack, "as it will her." Thalia intervened, her voice rising unbidden, a command that stilled a circling wolf mid-leap, turning it against the traitor Beta who had haunted her youth. He fell, gurgling, his blood staining the ice, and in that moment, forgiveness warred with vengeance in her soul. Freedom meant flight, abandoning Thorn to this bloodbath. Love demanded she stand, weaving her gift to shield him, risking the crown's chains. As Draven's sword grazed Thorn's shoulder, drawing crimson that steamed in the cold, Thalia extended her hands, the pendant blazing like a captured star. The moon answered, winds howling as wolves converged, forcing the rival back. Corvath fled into the night, his shouts swallowed by Weavos. But Draven paused, eyes widening at the power unbound. "Choose, little heir," he snarled, retreating a step. "War crowns the strong. Will you forgive the betrayer who forged your king's guilt, or unleash the storm?" Thalia's heart fractured under the weight, the blood on the snow a mirror to her dilemmas. Pardon the past that scarred them both, binding her to Thorn's redemption and the realm's fragile peace, or claim liberty in solitude, letting war consume the hierarchies that had rejected her. The pendant cooled, its light dimming as the wolves fell silent, the basin a tableau of panting breaths and moonlit gore. Thorn turned to her, bloodied but unbowed, his gaze a plea wrapped in duty, love as proof, not prize, demanding her choice amid the ethical abyss. Freedom or union, forgiveness or the blade's song. The night held its breath, the Diusa's judgment etched in frost and fire. The blood on the snow gleamed like veins of rubies under the moon's merciless gaze, each droplet a testament to the night's unraveling oaths. Thalia stood frozen in the basin's heart, the pendant at her throat a searing brand against her skin, its silver crescent pulsing in rhythm with the wolves' labored breaths. The air hung thick with the copper tang of fresh wounds and the acrid bite of scorched fur, the wind whispering through the pines like the Deuce's own lament. Around her, the fray had stilled into a precarious hush. Draven's scouts faltered at the ravine's edge, their torches sputtering like dying stars, while the wolves formed an unyielding ring, their eyes twin flames in the silvered dark. Thorn leaned on his sword, crimson rivulets tracing the furrow of his shoulder, his face a mask carved from granite and grief. The curse clawed at him visibly now, shadows flickering in his gray eyes, visions of the Queen's fall replaying in the hollows of his cheeks, her betrayal by Draven's hand, a specter that bound him tighter than any chain. He had chosen mercy once, sparing his brother after the Citadel's massacre, only for the hex to bloom from that leniency, sapping his strength and inviting the realm's fractures. Now, with Thalia's gift laid bare, the weight of that past pressed upon him like the mountain's shadow, demanding atonement through blade or forgiveness. Draven straightened, his black warhorse stamping the frost behind him, its breath a plume of defiance. His armor, etched with runes that twisted like serpents in the moonlight, caught the glow and threw it back in mocking shards. He was the mirror to Thorn's nobility, ambition unbridled, his betrayal a poison that had seeped into the bloodline, turning kin against kin. "Look at you, brother," he sneered, his voice a velvet rasp laced with venom, circling the basin's perimeter with deliberate steps that crunched the ice. Crouching before a thief's whelp, as if her parlor tricks can mend what mercy broke. The packs whisper of your weakness. The famine spreads because you hesitate, while I would raise these hollows to feed the strong. Thalia's chest tightened, the pendant's heat coiling through her like liquid fire, amplifying the storm within. The wolves at her feet shifted, their low rumbles vibrating in her bones, a chorus urging her to unleash them fully, to let fang and fury claim the traitor who embodied every rejection she had endured. Korvath's flight into the night echoed in her mind. The elder's face, once a pillar of the pack's indifferent justice, now twisted in cowardice as he bartered her life for scraps from Draven's table. Her past surged forth, the hollow scorn, the enforcer's blade that had scarred her arm in a lesson for her Omega frailty, the sister's child wasting away because survival's scales tipped always against the weak. Freedom beckoned in that rage, a solitary path through the wilds, unbound by crowns or curses, where she could vanish into the snow's embrace and let these alphas devour each other. Yet Thorn's gaze anchored her, raw and unarmored, his guilt a palpable force that bridged the chasm between them. He had not come to claim her as a prize, but as a reckoning. In her, he saw the Deuce's cruel poetry, the broken Omega who could heal the king's wound, not through blind devotion, but through the shared forge of choice. "Draven," Thorn said, his voice steady despite the blood seeping into his leather. "The throne you covet is built on ash. End this, yield to the air, and find peace in exile, as I once sought for you." The words carried the melancholy of a man who had bartered his soul for the realm's fragile harmony, his ethical core fracturing under the curse's assault. Visions assailed him anew, the Queen's eyes dimming in his arms, Draven's dagger withdrawn not in remorse but calculation, the hex's birth in a ritual of shadowed blood. Draven's laugh shattered the silence, cold as cracking ice, his eyes locking onto Thalia with predatory calculation. Peace? From her? He gestured dismissively, but his stance betrayed wariness. The wolf's deference a blade at his throat, her pendant's glow illuminating the runes on his armor like accusations. An Omega, marked for the pit, now plays at destiny? The Deuce favors the bold, not the beggars. Join me, little heir, or watch your king bleed out his foolish mercy. His scouts advanced a step, blades drawn, the air thickening with the promise of renewed slaughter, the moon above casting long shadows that merged blood and frost into a tapestry of inevitable war. Thalia's hands trembled, the pendant flaring brighter, channeling the wolf's primal surge into her veins, a visceral power that made her skin prickle with ethereal frost. She could feel it, the command to loose the pack, to let their fangs rend Draven's flesh and scatter his men like leaves in a gale, avenging the Hollow's betrayals and Thorn's haunted years. Vengeance sang in her blood, sweet as the warmth of stolen bread, promising liberation from the hierarchies that had cast her down. But as she met Thorn's eyes, the bond tugged insistently, resisted yet undeniable, a thread woven from their mutual exile, his guilt mirroring her shame, her gift the key to his unbinding. Love here was no gentle bloom, but a moral forge. To forgive the betrayer would chain her to the throne's burdens, healing Thorn at the cost of her solitude. To unleash war would free her spirit, but doom the realm to endless night, her rejection reborn as destruction. The alpha wolf at her side whined, pressing its scarred muzzle to her thigh, its warmth a reminder of the beast's instinctive fealty, born not of force, but revelation. The wind howled through the ravine, carrying weavos from distant peaks, the moon's light fracturing on the bloodied snow like shattered oaths. Thalia stepped forward, her voice emerging raw and resonant, threaded with the old tongue that stirred unbidden from the pendant's depths. "Enough," she commanded, the word rippling outward like a wave of lunar frost, stilling the scouts mid-stride and drawing a hiss from Draven's lips. The wolves tensed, muscles coiling, but held at her unspoken will, a testament to the power she could wield, yet the choice it demanded tore at her soul. Draven halted, his sword half raised, intrigue warring with fury in his gaze. "Choose, then," he pressed, the basin a crucible under the Deuce's watch. "Forgive my blade, bind yourself to his crumbling crown, and watch the packs kneel, or claim your freedom in blood, and let the strong inherit the moon." Thorn reached for her, his bloodied hand extended, a silent plea etched in the lines of his face, redemption through union, mercy as the true strength that could shatter his curse and hers. Thalia's heart fractured under the lunar glare, the pendant's pulse a drumbeat of destiny versus desire. To pardon was to embrace the wound, weaving love as proof amid the gore. To strike was liberty's sharp embrace, but at what cost to the fragile light they had kindled? The night deepened, the wolves' breaths steaming like prayers, the blood on the snow freezing into crimson sigils that whispered of choices eternal. Forgiveness or the blade, healing or the storm, her soul suspended in the ethical abyss where every path carved deeper scars. The moon's silver sickle hung suspended, a silent arbiter over the basin's bloodied tableau, its light weaving through the steam of ragged breaths like threads of fate unbound. Thalia's veins thrummed with the pendant's insistent fire, each pulse a echo of the wolves' unified heartbeats, their silver forms a living fortress against the encroaching shadows. The air was alive with the scent of iron and pine, the wind's howl a dirge that carried the distant clamor of fleeing scouts, their torches winking out like extinguished hopes. Draven stood poised at the ravine's throat, his sword a dark extension of his unyielding ambition, the runes on his armor flickering with malevolent hunger under the lunar gaze. His eyes, cold as permafrost, bored into her, daring the choice that would either crown or condemn. Thalia's bare feet sank into the snow, the chill seeping upward like doubt's insidious grasp, mingling with the warmth of the alpha wolf's flank pressed against her leg. Its scarred muzzle lifted, eyes reflecting the moon's indifferent mercy, a reminder of the instinctive bond that had pulled her from the pit's maw. She could feel the pack's essence coursing through her, their loyalty a wild current, raw and unfiltered, urging her to unleash the storm. Vengeance bloomed in her chest, hot and visceral, for the hollow scorn that had branded her a thief, for the enforcer's blade that had etched shame into her arm, for Alara's child fading in the grip of famine while alphas like Draven feasted on betrayal's spoils. Freedom whispered through the wind, promising the wild's solitude, a life unyoked from thrones and curses, where she could vanish into the frost-kissed forests and let these brothers' war consume itself in blood and ash. Yet Thorn's presence anchored her, his bloodied form a bastion amid the gore, the wound on his shoulder staining the snow in deepening crimson petals. His gray eyes met hers across the divide, shadowed by the guilt that had hollowed him. The ethical king who had spared Draven once, only to watch the hex take root, visions of the queen's dying light haunting his every decree. In him, she saw her own fractures reflected, rejection's slow poison, the Diusa's cruel forge turning outcasts into instruments of redemption. The bond between them tugged, no longer resisted but acknowledged in the quiet spaces of her soul, a rationalization yielding to acceptance, love as the trial that demanded sacrifice, not surrender. To strike would free her spirit, but shatter the fragile peace he embodied, dooming the realm to Draven's moonless reign. To forgive would bind her to the crown's weight, healing his curse through her gift, weaving their wounds into a tapestry of union. Draven advanced a step, his boot crunching the ice like a shattered vow, his voice a serpent's coil. The night wanes, heir. Will you play savior to this fool, or claim the power your blood sings for? The packs await a queen of fang, not frailty. His scouts regrouped at the edges, blades glinting, the air thickening with the promise of renewed fury. The wolves growled low, muscles rippling under fur like storm clouds gathering, their howls rising in a crescendo that shook the pines, the moon responding with a shaft of light that bathed Thalia in ethereal silver. She raised her hand, the pendant blazing like captured starfire, its runes etching luminous scars across her skin. The old tongue spilled from her lips, unbidden and resonant, a command woven from the Diusa's ancient breath. Kneel. The word rippled outward, a wave of lunar frost that froze the scouts in place, their weapons clattering to the snow as wills bent like reeds. Draven staggered, his runes flaring in defiance, but the wolves surged forward, not to rend, but to encircle, their forms a barrier of silver and shadow, heads lowered in enforced reverence. He dropped to one knee, not in fealty, but compulsion, his face twisting in rage and awe, the hex's echo in his blood yielding to the air's unyielding call. Thorn exhaled, a ragged sound laced with relief and sorrow, stepping closer as the curse's shadows receded from his eyes, the visions dissolving like mist under dawn's first touch. The pendant's light bridged them, its warmth flowing from her to him, mending the fracture with threads of moonlight and mercy. You choose healing, he murmured, his voice thick with the melancholy of atonement, his hand finding hers amid the steaming breaths. Blood from his wound smeared her palm, warm and real, a seal on the union forged in choice, their bond no immediate flame, but a slow-burning pyre, born of resisted instincts and finally embraced as proof of strength. Draven's head bowed fully now, the fight leaching from him like color from frostbitten flesh, his ambition crumbling under the weight of destiny's revelation. Mercy. Again, he rasped, the words a bitter concession, his eyes flickering with the ghost of remorse, or calculation deferred. Thalia felt no triumph, only the ache of sacrifice. Her freedom bartered for this fragile peace, the wild's call silenced by the realm's need. The wolves quieted, settling at her feet, their warmth a balm against the cold truth that redemption demanded union, not escape. She had chosen compassion over power, faith over despair, her rejection reborn as the key to Thorn's cure, and perhaps her own. As dawn's pale fingers crept over the peaks, painting the snow in hues of rose and gold, the basin transformed from battlefield to sanctuary. Draven rose unsteadily, bound by invisible chains of her command, his scouts yielding their arms in stunned silence. Thorn pulled her close, his embrace a shield against the wind's fading howl, the pendant cooling between them like a promise fulfilled. The Deuce's moon dipped toward the horizon, its light lingering on the bloodied sigils now melting into the earth, symbols of wounds sealed not by blade but by the ethical heart that had prevailed. In that Renascimento, Thalia felt the stirrings of a new self. Omega no longer cast aside, but ere entwined with King, their love a redemptive flame kindled in the forge of choice. The wolves lifted their muzzles in a final, triumphant chorus, echoing through the mountains as the first light broke, illuminating a path forward. Union tempered by sacrifice, where every scar became a crown of light. The realm would heal, slowly under their shared gaze, the guilt's shadows banished by the mercy that had crowned the fallen. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.